Excellent. Well, great. Good afternoon. I know folks are still coming back from lunch, so we're excited to have you here and for this conversation. I have a great group here with me, and you can read their very illustrious bios online as well. I don't think I need to tell anyone in this room how important trust is to developing adoption, scale, and investment in emerging technologies like blockchain, AI, and really in the broader innovation ecosystem that feeds into it. It's already come up, as we just heard, and as we've been hearing in many of the conversations today, and yet creating and maintaining trust and accountability in people, in companies, in the systems and technologies themselves, and in government is a challenge for us all. In her opening yesterday, I was struck when Danelle said, technology alone is not what makes blockchain successful, that it needs the human systems of communities and values, and trust is ultimately, or arguably, depending on how you see it, kind of a human application into the system. One sort of quick, interesting data point that I came across that I thought was worth mentioning was from this year's Edelman Trust Barometer, which was in that survey of 32,000 people across 28 middle and high-income countries. They asked people to think about their level of confidence and trust in innovation, and in the way, the confidence they have that business and NGOs are introducing technologies into the world, that government can regulate new technologies, and that science is independent, if you will, of politics and money. And interestingly, more than people were 2 times more likely to say they did not have trust in that innovation, did not have faith in people to sort of manage that innovation. So there's a lot to talk about. And luckily, as I said, I've got Candace Kelly, Chief Legal and Policy Officer from SDF. And we've got, I'm like reorganizing my order here as we speak. We've got Ronaldo Lemos. He's a professor and a leading voice and a member of the SDF board. Well, we have Kurt Fields, who is Chief of Lead for US Blockchain at PwC. And of course, we have Fabio Araujo, I think I got that right, who is the coordinator for DREX, which is the central bank digital currency of Brazil. But before we actually get to them, I know we're just coming, like I said, back into it, but we want to do something a little bit different in this panel, and we want to quickly hear from you all and get some of your ideas. So we want to ask you, and if you scan the code, there we go. What are the top barriers to building trust? So if you can all go in and join us in this participatory exercise, you will see some options that we have put forward. And we should start having your answers pop up on the screen any minute now. Or maybe hopefully they're in your app. We gave you a few options: data, interoperability, regulation, transparency. Oh, there we go. Wow. OK. We have some people participating. Wow. OK, as of now. All right, we'll give it another minute. Here we go. Couple more, give it another second here. All right. Yep. Transparency, all right. Transparency taking the lead here. 3 more seconds. OK, so we have transparency way in front. Regulation, corporate profit. Oh, regulation taking a last minute sort of jump. Oh, OK. All right. Little last finish, last chance. All right, we'll sort of go with this as our kind of final tally on this one. Excellent. Panel, we're going to come to you for your response, so take good note. We've got transparency and regulation sort of leading the two. corporate profit a bit behind it. All right, now we want to ask you, what technologies do you trust most? And we've got a few options for you to think through. They should be coming up momentarily. We're trusting you to engage with us here in our conversation today. Here we go.
Oh, it's down here.
Perhaps unsurprising, CBDC and stable. Oh, here we
We're
go.
also on
It is.
This one's moving. Everyone likes this question. OK, we're going to give it another 30 seconds. I mean, maybe these answers are not super surprising. All right, 5 more seconds. All right, well, excellent. Thank you all for trusting us to share your voice. And with that, let me kick it over to the panel to start to get your thoughts. I'm going to start with you, Fabio. Did these findings surprise you in any way, these responses? Do they reinforce or kind of conflict with what your experience tells you?
Well, actually,
I'm going to ask Kurt you the same question.
Actually, they reinforce my views. I think that transparency is fundamental, and as the only regulator here, regulation is also quite important. We face skepticism when we try to apply a new technology from incumbents, from newcomers, from the public in general, because when you talk about the financial lives of people, innovating is very scary. If we don't do that in the right way, we can generate a mess for the whole population. And it's very necessary to make the process as transparent as possible, so we can achieve the regulatory framework that brings more value for the population. And if we move on to the second one, you may see why this is hard for central banks to move into blockchains. You saw that payments and transaction systems are very trustworthy, and they are. Yeah, that's our job, to make them trustworthy. But we think that blockchain can bring new values for the system. And CBDC and stablecoins go right behind, and we are trying to push it forward to make people to trust, so we can reap the values that this technology can bring to the population.
That's great. We're going to come back to you to get a little more granular, if you will, on the direct. Kurt, let me come to you from your vantage point. What surprised you working with the private sector as you do?
So I think maybe taking a little bit of a different perspective, seeing transparency so high on the list makes a lot of sense, because when we look at legacy technology, consumers and institutions didn't put transparency as their foremost concern. It was functionality, it was accessibility, and just that it didn't break. Right? Now fast forward to blockchain, generative AI, quantum compute, and because of the inherent capabilities of these technologies, we're expecting more when it comes to transparency. And so I think it's actually an exciting evolution of how we think about the way trust is measured, the way it's defined in these systems, because of what blockchain and these other emerging technologies are bringing to the technology stack, and not just within one enterprise, but across an ecosystem of companies, which is an entirely different way of thinking when you look at the way data is structured, the way it's shared, and the way that, again, both consumers and institutions are engaging with the technology itself.
So interesting, and I'm going to come back to you on the industry piece. Let me get Candace's and Ronaldo's take on the response, but also how would you have answered the questions if you were in the audience?
Well, it's interesting to see that transparency was the top choice, and I think it's a natural one. But just yesterday, I was talking with Fabio about the implementation of the CBDC in Brazil. Brazil is doing this amazing job in creating competition in the financial markets. It created like a payment system called Pix, and it will be launching a CBDC system called Drex that also has smart contracts attached to it. So if you think about it, it's probably going to be one of the first countries to deploy smart contracts at scale, which it's very exciting for me. But one thing that Fabio told me, and I thought was interesting, is that people are looking not only for transparency, but they are also looking for privacy. Yeah. So they fear that if the CBDC is implemented, all the transactions will be transparent, and there are certain things which I think it's very welcome if you're dealing with treasuries. There is a lower degree for privacy, but if you're dealing with private transactions, how do you build a layer that actually protects privacy when you're dealing with something at scale as a national CBDC? So yes, I'm all for privacy, but there are some things that require, I'm all for transparency, but there are some things that require privacy as well.
So Candace, picking up on that.
Yeah, well, that was my exact reaction was when I saw transparency. First, I thought, it's a bit of a self-selected audience.
Yes.
Blockchain enthusiasts here in the room. And that there is that balance with transparency and privacy. And so I think the other piece, picking up on what you quoted Danella as saying, is we're talking about the transparency in the technology, but there are always humans involved, whether it's on the regulatory side or on the industry side, and the people who are putting this technology out into the world. And so the transparency from those folks, especially when you're talking about new innovations, because the innovators always come before the regulators. So we can talk later more about what the role of the regulator is, but the innovators have to be both using transparent technologies, recognizing that there is also a balance with privacy, and being transparent about when new technologies come out, there are mistakes, right? You have to be transparent about what it is, what it isn't, and when you make a mistake, or when you over-rotate on transparency and not privacy, or over-rotate on privacy to the expense of transparency, and that's part of the process. But the transparency of that human element, I think, is also critical.
So picking up on the transparency piece, which is clearly a key theme, and a number of these other barriers to trust are in some ways related to transparency. And Kurt, coming back to you and what you were saying, I mean, you necessarily work with companies and across a variety of industries, some of which are lower transparency industries. So what have you seen as some of the specific tactics that work, right, in creating that transparency in maybe in different industries, ones that are not necessarily inherently more open and transparent, and how does the interoperability aspect come into it? You mentioned, when you're thinking about blockchain and AI, and that's also come up in some of the other conversations that we've heard.
Well, I think the biggest game changer has been that, again, thinking about technology for the last 50 years, it's been through an enterprise mindset. Yeah. And unfortunately, I think one of the negative byproducts of that has been that the enterprise's interests aren't always aligned with the rest of the stakeholders that are involved. Again, whether it's a consumer, a regulator, a counterparty. And so the enterprise is designing the systems, the way that it treats data, and the way that then it interfaces with external parties in a way that may be asymmetric with others' interests. And a lot of times that does impact trust and transparency. And now with especially blockchain, but also some of these other emerging technologies, it's forcing a conversation around what brokered trust looks like. And stakeholders now have a louder voice around what that needs to look like. Again, redefining the way trust is even interpreted, and also making it a real-time discussion. The other game changer with blockchain, in that legacy systems, most were operating in an episodic fashion in the way that it was exchanging data, processing data, and allowing different entities to engage. So blockchain is bringing this interpretation of trust also to a real-time view and forcing a real-time evolving discussion. We know that trust on blockchain is not perfect today. It will continue to evolve. But I think, again, the fact that it is making companies, institutions, individuals, regulators have active discussions in real time about what evolved governance looks like, codified on-chain, that's a massive shift from the way that systems have operated for the last 50 years.
It's so interesting that you say that because the discussion, that's a word that I haven't heard as much, right, around the communication element becomes really a critical key in the design and thinking about, whether it's, the human-centered design is something that I've, engaged with, and it sounds like that's actually a really key piece of this, of building the trust, is that communication.
Yeah, I think that, and again, it then trickles into the way that you're thinking about everything from commercial arrangements with your counterparties to the way that you think about, consumer protection to the way that, again, you're engaging with the regulators, and the notion that now it has to be a discussion and there has to be transparency around how that new governance is being evolved and developed and then codified into these systems. It's a completely different motion from the way we've implemented technology in the past.
So picking up on that, Ronaldo, are law and governance and trust necessarily at odds with each other when it comes to the blockchain and other technologies? I mean, can you have both? Must you have both?
Well, the answer to that is it's complicated.
Fair enough.
But what I've been seeing is that law, of course, follows behind any type of innovation, right? But if you approach lawmaking and regulation from a smart perspective, you actually achieve better results. And speaking from the experience I have in Brazil, I participated in building Brazil's internet law, the so-called Marco Civil in 2014. And that was built through a public participation. It was completely open and transparent. And it's probably one of the very few laws that was built through this sort of online, transparent public contributions. And of course, the result is that the Brazilian law is still now very well regarded. It's protective of openness, of innovation. It's completely pro-technology. And I think that is a result of basically trying and getting the opinion of as many people and as many institutions as possible in building it. So I'm very enthusiastic about this idea of a more reflective regulation, one in which the regulators are actually in contact with the innovators in order to build better decisions. And that's why I think, for instance, it's great that Fabio is here today at this teleconference, because I think that's exactly the type of conversation that I think we should establish more.
Absolutely. Well, since you got name checked, Fabio, well, let's come to you. We know that blockchain has sort of enabling power with respect to digital public infrastructure and vice versa. And Brazil has been progressive on that front, as we're hearing, and as it relates to the CBDC, to the DREX. What has, we've heard a little bit from Ronaldo, but what have you seen? What have been some of the specific tactics that you've been working on and that, with your colleagues to bring this out and sort of in a trustful way, so to speak?
Well, I think that what Ronaldo said on the Marco Civil that was voted in Brazil applies to what we are doing right now in the development of DREX, because we were faced with the following situation. We finished PIX, and we envisioned the possibility of using smart contracts and composability to bring more participation into the financial market in Brazil from fintechs, startups, and from the population. But this was a very new technology, and if we use the way that we used to do things before, we would just get into our offices for 10 years studying the technology, devising the plans, and then in 10 years we would come up with a CBDC, but it would be too late. Then instead of doing that, we decided to bring up some guidelines for the discussion and to open the discussion with the market, to bring stakeholders in participation to see first what could be done with this technology. For the Central Bank of Brazil, it was a technology with very high potential for application, but we are not the ones that are going to provide services there. We need to provide regulation and platform, a digital public infrastructure, to make sure that the market participants have access. but the services are created by the market participants. Then our first question was, what do you want to make out of this technology? And back in 2022, Stellar participated in the Lift Challenge. It was a very interesting lab. We've learned, yeah, there are lots of interesting things to be done with this technology. Then we need to move ahead, and we got stuck in the privacy. Again, we have a very modern law in data protection for the individual population, the individuals in Brazil. And we need to make sure that this ecosystem that was built to be open could give privacy to personal data. And that's what we are working on right now. And I think that the most important aspect in each step of the way, we try to bring as many stakeholders as possible into the conversation. Right now, we have almost 70 companies that are engaged in the pilot, and we just opened another call for new entrants in the pilot. We are going to be selecting the cases up to the end of this year or up to the beginning of next year. The submission period is open until the end of November, and we are willing to accept lots of different use cases to test in the platform.
So again, going back to what we talked about earlier with Kurt, the communication, the consultation, the dialogue really has been a key factor, along with having the law on the books that helps kind of drive it, Ronaldo, that you mentioned. So we're hearing about Brazil being a leader. Candace, I'm going to come back to you. You have a pretty global view of regulatory and sort of policy and guidance. How do you see the role of the regulator or the broader policymaker in creating that ethical implementation and therefore helping to build that trust?
Well, first, I just want to say that not everyone is Brazil. So thank you, because it really is, this process is really important, because now I think we all have much more direct engagement as consumers with new technologies. I don't think that was necessarily true, and I think that goes to your point, Kurt, of this evolution of how things have to be addressed by regulators, because it does need to be led by the innovators and the builders who understand the technology. And let's face it, everything is already regulated. We have consumer protection, we have privacy, and so new technology shouldn't be, oh, we have this new technology, we need to create a blockchain technology or an AI technology. We need to learn from those principles that we have, and the innovators and the builders should be able to follow that and lead. And I think, we've heard from Dante earlier today from Circle. It's a really good example of a company that recognized that they didn't have a lot of regulations, but they went ahead and they knew that they had to be transparent, they had to be accountable, and now they're the first and only ones who are meeting the standards of MiCA. So the regulator came to that. And so I think that these consultations and these conversations, the regulator is in a position to be able to make sure, because not every company has the luxury of being able to think about all the different things all things all at once. So having these consultations and bringing people together and having a blockchain expert and some people who are privacy experts say, okay, well, how are we going to figure this out, and have the regulator be a part of that process, because they want to come out with a principles-based framework, I think is the real role. But it's not, the regulator isn't the answer, the industry is not the answer, it's a collaboration. But there's already plenty of principles that everyone should be building towards.
I mean, on that note, you said not everyone is Brazil. Who else is starting to get this right, or are you seeing take steps along the journey?
Well, I think any of the any region or country that is really engaging and doing sandboxes and doing pilots and doing things, you see that in Asia, you see that not so much in the United States. And then you have the other extreme of a place like Nigeria that it seems like there's a new, every 6 months there's some very dramatic shift, and clearly not a lot of engagement and communication. So, yeah, so I think there are plenty of good examples. And I think the other piece that industry can bring is, as global technologists who are engaging in all those different regions, making sure that some of that, the learnings from other regions we are part of the process of bringing that across borders as well.
It's a really great point. I was in one of the sessions earlier today, and they were talking about just a number of the sandboxes and the licensing that are happening in Southern Africa and a number of the countries in Southern Africa in particular that are really sort of moving the needle faster than other folks may even realize is happening. And sort of picking up on that, Kurt, I want to come back to you on, again, what are some of the design choices that you're seeing that are making a difference in bringing trust into the technologies?
Well, I think to build off of what Candace just highlighted, I think one of the other challenges that we're seeing large institutions, national governments struggle with right now is that this is one of the first technologies that really is delivering on the promise of localized, fit-for-purpose tooling. I mean, compare this to where we were with cloud 25 years ago and the way that cloud was being rolled out. And the flexibility was not there. And it was also, frankly, when you think about how cloud was implemented, it was easier to regulate because there was less permutation of the technology. Blockchain, because it is enabling such localized innovation, it's kind of a double-edged sword. Like, we're seeing needs met where necessary in different jurisdictions. I mean, comparing the emerging markets where it is addressing some very specific problems, and that's why we're seeing fantastic adoption in certain cases, contrasted with the developed markets where we're seeing it more from like a business model reinvention angle, where we're seeing large institutions see the writing on the wall that this is the future, but it is a slower process because it is forcing them to rethink the way that they approach the market, the way that they leverage their existing technology stacks. But again, coming back to the point around trust, I think at the individual level, at the community level, we're seeing more organic trust in the tools because it is more fit for purpose, but it's leading to a lot of permutation. So I think the other thing that's very important about blockchain is the fact that it is interoperable, because it is allowing many different communities, countries, and ecosystems to understand the way that these tools start to fit together, the way they start to play together, and ultimately, again, integrate into legacy system, legacy process.
So just picking up on that, the fact that blockchain does have the potential to be global, so to speak, right, at a global level, but also, have that global reach and scale, but also work at the more local level to address localized context and issues and problems. On that note, though, we're also seeing widening, to some extent, inequality in access, in affordability, in ability to use, right, from a kind of a digital skills perspective. That's within countries as well as across. This is a particular aspect of this conversation that's sort of near and dear to the work that I do in financial inclusion and thinking about kind of how to bring these services to the global majority. And so, I'm curious, to get each of your thoughts on the kind of inequality question, right? How do we think about that sort of digital divide and inequality, which especially for individuals, but for communities and really countries at large, and governments think about sort of inequality as it relates to the trust factor in emerging technologies and then the way that they're used. So I'd love to get each of your kind of thoughts from your different perspectives. Fabio, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Well, I think that PIX is an example of, how we can include the population using new technology. If you make the user experience simple enough, you can achieve that. In PIX, in the first 2 years of operation, we managed to bring 71 million people into the digital space. They made their first digital transfer in their lives. That was a huge accomplishment. And if you look into what the non-bank PSPs are making in Brazil, giving access to crypto, it's also very easy to access that. Then the population have a tool that's very easy to use at their hands to access markets that they were not able to access before. And with this digital assets technology, we think that other financial products can be brought to the hands of the population. Then there is always this concern. Will this technology result in a good outcome or in a bad outcome? I don't think that depends on the technology itself. It depends on how you develop it and how you regulate and how the stakeholders put that together. And that's why, as a regulator, I think that we cannot afford to be out of the discussion, because you can end up concentrating a lot, or you can end up democratizing the access, and that's what we want to do there in Brazil.
It's a really great point. I mean, having a positive experience with some aspect of a digital, a digital asset or a financial transaction. There's been some interesting studies that show that whether if you've received a government payment digitally, that you are more likely to then use digital financial services. Kurt, what are your thoughts on this?
Sure. So I think one of the things that I love most about Stellar is actually Stellar has tackled one of the tougher questions, which is what is the new definition of financial inclusion? Because we've operated under a definition of financial inclusion that's been around for decades for legacy financial products and legacy financial institutions. And so I think when you look at the way that financial inclusion is defined, it obviously comes back to first having a localized context. When you look at the differences in the markets that are being served, take Kenya, for example, where inclusion from a mobile money or digital access standpoint is actually not a concern. They have one of the highest rates of penetration of mobile money, but then when you look at the user journey through actually going through the financial services journey of engaging with other financial products, we see a drop-off. And why? It's financial literacy. So it's actually not a technology problem. It's actually not an access problem. It is more about providing the learning resources to make sure that people understand how to navigate that journey. Contrast it with somewhere like the Philippines, where it's more of a cultural challenge, because the way that people exchange money in many cases in the traditionally underserved market in the Philippines is in person, because they're performing other commercial activities in person around the way that they exchange money and purchase products, sell products. And so, again, I think networks like Stellar have done a really good job of taking that definition of financial inclusion and localizing the interpretation, because the metrics cannot be the same jurisdiction to jurisdiction.
Yeah, couldn't agree with you more on that, and the way that we're sort of rethinking what financial inclusion actually means, the way to measure it, and then how does that relate back to trust and sort of inequality and closing digital divides. Candace, I'm going to come to you. We're coming up on time, but I'd love to kind of get your kind of final thoughts on this, and then we'll come to Ronaldo.
I can be quick since Kurt talked a lot, but I'll just give one small anecdote of when we were working with UNHCR, and we were challenged to say, well, you need to help us with the people who are going to be using this product. And this is a product that is their lifeblood. They are going to put food on the table and heat their homes and shelter. We need a user experience that is narrow, that's not going to overwhelm, and that is going to meet people at all ages and all levels. And so I think that user experience and learning, I think people think of financial literacy and say, oh, we're going to teach it in schools. No, it has to be in the user experience, in that journey, and specific to the region, the use case, and I think that's a really critical part of that inclusion and building the trust.
Absolutely. So it's coming again back to design, back to context vigilance. Ronaldo, we're going to give you the kind of last short word on building on what we're hearing as far as reducing inequality, creating trust.
Yeah.
Bringing it all together.
Very quickly, because we are almost out of time. But first thing, I think having the regulator having skin in the game is very important. So that's what the Brazilian Central Bank has done. It created this digital public infrastructure for payments called Pix. And it's amazing to see, because if you ask what are the largest platforms in Brazil, some people will say, oh, YouTube, Facebook, WhatsApp. No, it's Pix. It's a governmental platform, which is the #1 used platform in the country, because the government, no one likes to download a governmental app, you know, that's bad. But if you build a technology that people actually like to use and it's useful and improves people's lives, they will show, you know, they will start using that. And that's why, as Fabio mentioned, now Pix has like 110 million users in the country. So I think there's a parallel with that with the blockchain. So I see what Stellar does, for instance, as a sort of a digital public infrastructure in a box.
Yeah.
So it makes it very easy for anyone to implement payment solutions wherever you are that are useful, just like Pix was in Brazil.
So simplification, communication, context vigilance, design-centered, user-oriented, just some of the things we've touched on. Thank you so much. Thank you all. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
We could have talked all day.
Thank you.